Nobody in that hallway was supposed to hear it. That's the thing about Backstage at the Grammys. It looks glamorous on television. The red carpet, the sequins, the speeches. But behind those doors, it's controlled chaos. Assistants running with garment bags, security guys muttering into earpieces, caterers squeezing past publicists. Everyone moving fast, nobody making eye contact, because eye contact slows you down, and slowing down is not allowed. It was February 1994, the 36th Grammy Awards held at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. And somewhere in that beautiful madness backstage, two women were about to share a moment that neither of them would ever fully describe in public. Whitney Houston was 30 years old that night. She had already done things that most singers spend entire careers chasing: the debut album, the run of number ones, and then just the year before, The Bodyguard. That soundtrack, that song, I Will Always Love You, had done something to the culture that's hard to explain now if you weren't alive to feel it. It didn't just top the charts, it rewired what people thought a human voice was capable of. She walked into the Grammys that night carrying something heavier than any award. She carried the weight of being exactly what everyone needed her to be, every single night, without exception. Mariah Carey was 24. She had already released 4 albums. She had already proven something remarkable: a vocal range that technically, scientifically, went places most singers couldn't follow. The whistle register, the runs, the precision. Music critics talked about her the way engineers talk about a finely built machine. There was genuine awe in it, but there was also a coldness to that kind of praise. You can admire a machine without loving it. The two women occupied the same orbit in the early 90s. Same label, Arista, same era, same conversation. Every magazine wanted to make it a competition. Every radio DJ wanted to settle it. Fans picked sides like it was a sport. The industry fed the tension because tension sold covers and tension sold records. And the industry has always known that. But here's what the magazines didn't print. Here's what the radio DJs didn't know. The real moment happened not on a stage with cameras rolling, but in a corridor under fluorescent lights, with maybe 5 people watching. It started the way a lot of things start, with someone saying something they probably shouldn't have. A small group had gathered: assistants, a stylist, 1 or 2 people from the label side. Just people standing around the way you do when you're waiting for something to happen. The conversation drifted the way conversations drift backstage, loose and slightly nervous. The way talk gets when everyone's running on coffee and adrenaline. Somebody brought up range. This happens around singers the way conversations about height happen around basketball players. It's the obvious thing, the quantifiable thing, the thing that feels like an argument you could actually win because you can measure it. Somebody started listing notes, registers, octaves. And Mariah, in the easy, matter-of-fact way of someone stating something they simply believe to be true, said it. Whitney is incredible, but this is about range, and range is mathematics. She didn't say it cruelly. That's important to understand. She said it the way you say 2 + 2 = 4, like it was settled, like the conversation had a correct answer and she was just pointing at it. The room shifted, not loudly, just that slight recalibration that happens when something lands in a way people didn't expect. A few eyes moved. Someone picked up a coffee cup they'd already finished. The stylist found something very interesting to look at near the floor. Whitney was standing maybe 10 feet away. She had heard every word, and she did something that, if you know her, is maybe the most Whitney Houston thing she could have done. She didn't argue. She didn't get loud. She didn't cross her arms or raise an eyebrow or say a single syllable in response to the mathematics comment. She just stood up. She stood up slowly, the way someone stands up when they're not in a hurry, when they have nowhere to be and nothing to prove. She smoothed the front of her dress. She looked at nobody in particular, and then she opened her mouth. No microphone, no piano, no track humming underneath her. Just the air in that corridor and the sound she was about to put into it. What she sang, those opening notes, just a few bars, a cappella, unrehearsed, pulled from somewhere. It didn't sound like a rehearsal. It didn't sound like a demonstration. It sounded like a woman telling the truth about something she'd known since she was a little girl, singing in New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, while her mother, Sissy Houston, watched from the choir. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. maybe 12. But as the last note faded, and it faded slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't want to leave the room, nobody was doing math anymore. Someone's cup hit a table a little too hard, the way your hand does something clumsy when your brain is occupied with something else entirely. One of the assistants, a young woman who had worked in the industry long enough to think she'd seen everything, later told someone close to the situation that she'd felt it in her chest. Not heard it, felt it. It was like the temperature changed, she said. Like something physical happened to the air. Mariah Carey didn't speak. She was looking at Whitney the way you look at something when you've just realized you were thinking about it wrong. Not embarrassed, not defeated. Something quieter than that. Something more private. The kind of recalibration that happens inside a person when an assumption they've been carrying turns out to be smaller than the reality in front of them. There's a difference between knowing someone is great and being in the room when greatness takes up all the oxygen. You can know a thing for years and still be surprised by it when it's standing right in front of you. Whitney didn't stay to watch the reaction. She didn't look around the room to see who had noticed. She picked up her clutch from the chair where she'd set it, adjusted one of her earrings, and walked back toward her dressing room at the same unhurried pace she'd had before any of this started. She never mentioned the moment. Not that night, not in interviews, not on any talk show couch where some host might have tried to coax it out of her. If you asked her about Mariah, she was gracious, the way she was always gracious, because Whitney Houston understood that there was enough room for everyone, and she didn't need to tear anyone down to stay standing. But the people in that hallway remembered. And later that evening, when the cameras were rolling and the audience was enormous and the world was watching, Mariah Carey led the applause for Whitney Houston with an enthusiasm that surprised a few people who'd been paying attention. It didn't surprise the ones who had been in that corridor. The truth is, Whitney had been carrying this particular weight for a long time, since before The Bodyguard, since before the world fell in love with that version of I Will Always Love You, a song, let's not forget, that almost didn't happen the way it did. When producer David Foster first played the arrangement for the film, it was beautiful, orchestral, sweeping, but it didn't have that opening, that unaccompanied a cappella stretch before the music comes in. If I should stay, that was a decision Whitney made almost instinctively. She wanted to go in alone. She wanted there to be a moment where there was nothing between her and the listener. No safety net of production. Just her voice and everything it had been given and everything it had earned. Some people in the room that day weren't sure. A cappella openings in pop records were a risk. They were a statement. You're essentially saying, here I am, unprotected. Here is exactly what this voice is. And if the voice isn't enough, if there's any question, any hesitation, any wobble, the whole thing unravels before it begins. There was no wobble. There never was with Whitney. Not when she decided to go somewhere. What people forget, or maybe never fully knew, is what it cost her to be that. The voice didn't arrive effortlessly every morning like sunshine. It was maintained and protected and worried over and prayed over. Her mother's voice was in it, yes. Sissy Houston is one of the great gospel singers of the 20th century, and that inheritance was real and precious. But inheritance is just the starting point. What Whitney did with it was her own. She grew up watching her mother and her godmother, Aretha Franklin, treat the voice as something sacred, not just a talent, a responsibility, a thing that had been given to you, which meant you owed something back to it, which meant you didn't waste it on things that didn't deserve it. That gospel foundation was the thing the industry kept trying to manage. Arista wanted a pop princess, clean, marketable, crossover friendly, and Whitney delivered that brilliantly, more successfully than almost anyone before or since. But underneath every perfect pop production, underneath every choreographed video, and every carefully worded press release, there was a Newark church girl who knew exactly what her voice was actually for. Range is mathematics. Maybe. In the way that a river is also hydrogen and oxygen. Technically true. Missing the point entirely. You can measure a river, you can chart its width and depth and calculate its flow rate. You can do all of that and still have no idea what it feels like to stand on its bank at dusk when the light is going gold and something in you quiets down for the first time all day. Whitney Houston's voice was a river. You could talk about its range. You could notate it on a page. And then you could hear it in a fluorescent lit hallway on a February night in 1994 and realize that you had been describing the wrong thing all along. Years later, many years after losses and struggles and the long, difficult arc of a life lived entirely in public, Mariah Carey was asked in an interview about the great voices of her generation. She paused in the way people pause when they're deciding how honest to be, and then she said, carefully and clearly, there are singers who have range, and then there is Whitney. Those are two different conversations. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Anyone who had been in that hallway already understood exactly what she meant. The 36th Grammy Awards ended, the way they all end, with the cameras pulling back and the lights dimming and everyone dispersing into the New York night. The moments that mattered most that evening were not the ones that happened on the stage. They were the ones that happened in the spaces in between, in the corridors, in the dressing rooms, in the small, unremarkable patches of carpet where no camera was rolling and no publicist was managing the narrative, and two extraordinary women were just, briefly, alone with the truth of what music actually is. Whitney Houston won 3 Grammys that night, but the things she won in that hallway had no trophy and no podium and no applause. It was just 10 seconds of sound that reminded everyone within earshot why certain voices don't need defending. They just need to sing. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of everyone's expectations, only to silence them with your true gift? Tell us your story in the comments below. And if moments like this one matter to you, the real stories, the ones that happen when nobody's supposed to be watching, make sure you subscribe, because there are more of them, and they deserve to be told.